Hey folks, Dave Temple here. As you know, my podcast is all about talking to the best thriller writers in the world. Now, while I don't put myself in that category of the best, I've certainly got my hat now in the ring. And after nearly 3 years of hosting this podcast, I think it's time to toot my own horn, if you will. So with that, I'm offering my thriller, The Poser, for sale all this month. It stars Detective Pat Norelli, a rookie cop working the overnight beat in Hollywood when one of the town's biggest stars is found dead in her Hollywood Hills home only hours after winning an Oscar. Beloved by her fans, Pat thinks someone wants this star dead and sees this as a way to forge her own path and get the promotion she craves. I'm proud of the response I've gotten from fans, and I'm confident you're going to like The Poser. So for the rest of this month, you can get the ebook for only $5 or the paperback for $14. Since I do this weekly podcast as a free service, perhaps you'd consider this as a way to help out a fellow thriller writer. There are two ways to reach the link. First, you can go to davidtemplebooks.com, scroll down to see The Poser, click, and you're on your way. Or head over to Amazon. You can find it there. Again, davidtemplebooks.com or Amazon. Thanks in advance for your support. And now, on with the show. On today's Thriller Zone, we welcome Matthew Quirk, author of Inside Threat. Hello and welcome to the Thriller Zone. I'm your host, David Temple, and we are wrapping up the month of May. And what a doozy it has been. Do people still use the word doozy? Don Winslow, Jack Carr, TJ Newman, Chris Haughty, 2 bonus episodes with Frank Bill and Elisa Valdez. And now we end the month with Matthew Quirk and his book, Inside Threat. It has been a heck of a ride this month. And I often say, can I top it? Oh, yes, we can. And I'll tell you all about that shortly. But right now, let's welcome Matthew Quirk to the Thriller Zone. Hey, Matthew, I can call you Matt Quirk. Welcome to the Thriller Zone.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Now, I like the fact that you are such a meticulous attention to detail guy. You got the TV poster behind you. You got the book placed. I mean, this is not your first rodeo, is it?
It's a Potemkin village back there because I'm in a corner of the bedroom. I've mucked up, and then I see these authors and they have these ego walls that you could die for. and I just, fortunately, I stole a poster from the premiere. And I still have an arc left. I gave the rest away, and the shoebox it's perched upon hasn't fallen over. So thank you, and yeah. I'm glad. But this is nothing. This is plaster and lighting.
Yeah. Well, I want you to know that the little view that you have is very beautifully, handsomely articulated. However, if I spun the camera a little bit over, it is a disaster zone with piles of books on the floor and maybe some underwear too, but we'll keep that to ourselves.
And I like to joke about the Zoom dickie, that this is just, it's better with a collar shirt, that this just cuts off here and then I'm in some Bermuda shorts or something.
I'm not even believing the Bermuda shorts, to tell you the truth, man.
No.
Yeah. And by the way, Dickie, there's a pull from the past. Did you ever own a Dickie?
People are wearing Dickies anymore. And I think it's a funny bit in the Zoom era, but I also, it doesn't sound, you don't want to say, I had my Dickie on the Zoom because, it's the end of your career.
For those of you who do not know what a Dickie is, and I had them back in high school, it's a turtleneck that's sewn to a little flap. And the flap will go here, and the other flap is on the back. So you can put it underneath a shirt. So you can look like you're wearing a turtleneck and a shirt, but you're not super hot.
And they do sell a Zoom Dickie. I looked this up, and it's just a collared shirt that you can wear under a sweater. Or if you get your camera right, you can only wear that part. And that's my sort of icebreaker Zoom joke, the Zoom Dickie.
The Zoom Dickie. Yeah. Now, if I go down the hall a few minutes after the show and I say, "Hey, honey, can you want to see my new Zoom Dickie?" She's going to go,
No. Yeah,
honey, I'm on my own Zoom call. Yeah, I'm on my own Zoom.
Make sure that it's very clear what you're talking about.
Yeah. All right. Well, it is a pleasure to meet you. I did learn very recently that you and I are inside. We're not the same zip code, but we're in the same city per se. I'm in Encinitas, and you're in.
San Diego, Ocean Beach, Point Loma
Yeah.
neighborhood.
Well, in the fifth season, coming up in July, the Thriller Zone is going to be going on location and doing more face-to-face. So we somehow missed that this time with communication faux pas, but we will do that in the next book. How about that?
That sounds fantastic.
Because you're in a gorgeous part of town.
As are you.
It is pretty sweet.
But that's San Diego.
Yeah.
You could fall off a truck and you're like, oh, it's beautiful here.
It is true. We're exactly 1 mile from the beach. I'm actually reading a project that I'm working on yesterday, overlooking Swami's, which is a famous little surfing spot.
Yeah.
And as you can see, because of the little sun, it's perfect every day. It's pretty silly. All right. The book is Inside Threat. We're going to be talking about this in great detail. It is a riveting read, and boy, I was thinking back when we were getting ready to go on the show, and I'm like, what was the first book? This is only the second book of yours that I read. The first one was Hour of the Assassin. Mm-hmm. And I ran across that, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago, and it was Nick Avero's Special Agent, Secret Service. Wow, that was one of my favorite books because that thing flew, by the way. What was your secret there?
Well, the secret was that was a rewrite, and it's always funny because when I look back on it, it seems like one of these like meticulously planned, clean, lean books.
Right.
But I had to rewrite the whole thing in 90 days with kind of a new plot, and then I came up for air at the end because it was 90 days straight, and I never worked so hard on anything in my life. And I came up and I'm like, I've been in so deep. I just hope this is any good. And then said, oh, this is great. And then, when I look back at it now, it just seems like this nice, like, concept that sort of is like, I'll say it again, like clean and lean, and,
right.
And when you look at the actual gestation of that book, it was this crazy process of tearing out the whole plot and putting in a new one. So you never really know what goes into something and kind of what comes out at the end, or what will make a good book. Because when I was in the middle of that rewrite, I was like, oh, this is a disaster. Everything's falling apart. And then I came up and they said, this is great. And I was like, okay, great.
Yeah. Isn't it funny, Matt, what we say as writers in those quiet moments to ourselves as we're crafting in the wee small hours of the morning? Thank you, Frank Sinatra. And you're just doing that work, and you could be a third, a half, you could be 3/4 the way through and just have that little voice on your shoulder go, this really kind of sucks.
Oh, yeah.
And how you have to go, hey, wait a minute, I wasn't talking to you. Get away. I mean, it's a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, it's a funny job where you just factor in 1 or 2 all is lost moments in each book. Not in, because that's like a screenwriting term, not in the action of the book, but in your life as you write the book. There's going to be a moment where you're like, this book doesn't work.
Right.
I wasted 9 months. I couldn't miss my deadline, And it's funny to see people like Harlan Coben, who's like so incredible, so successful. And, you read his interviews and he's like, oh, yeah, I go through hell on each book. Or Daniel Silva, who's a master. And I was reading one of his books and he's like, I had to completely rewrite this book and I didn't know I'd get it in time. So it's a ride.
I first heard it recently. Who was I on with? Bob Dugoni. And Bob has written a stack of paper. And he made a comment that, oh yeah, Dave, it's nerve-wracking. I almost hate every one. I'm like, Bob, are you kidding me? And he goes, yeah, every single solitary one. And I thought, what is that about us? Have we not given ourselves permission? Do we not think we're good enough? I mean, it's a crazy mindset.
Well, it's really subjective,
Yeah.
So there's times where I'll outline a book and then give it to the editor and they're like, well, it didn't work, and I'll say, well, that was the outline. So it's such an execution-dependent, subjective thing, and it's such a crazy job where I was very successful with the first book, very fortunate, and then I went to write the second book, and I assumed that they would say, like, give us an outline, and we'll kind of check in and make sure everything's moving along. Like, I would have a job almost, because they had a lot invested in the second book. And they're just like, we'll see you next year with a book. I hope it's good. They weren't that like brusque about it, but that was effectively what was going on. And I thought, I'm just going to go off and hope that in sitting and playing make-believe by myself in a room for a year, I come up with something stellar. So it's a crazy journey in each book.
While we're on this topic, and you're going to have great insight to this, I can already tell. So I'm thinking to myself, what if you handed it to your editor and the editor goes, I don't feel it. And, okay, let me get back to you. That night you're having dinner with a friend who happens to be another editor, and you're just, I don't think this would ever happen. And you go, here, take a look. Oh yeah, I got some time. And they loved it. What would that do to your head?
Oh, well, that can happen because I have like beta readers and I have an incredible agent who was an editor. And so when everybody says it stinks in the same way, that's great. You're like, oh, okay, I'll fix that. But when you have the really brain-breaking thing is when two people tell you different things and they're people whom you trust, which I've had happen. But that's why I'm the president, secretary, treasurer, and board of Rough Draft Inc. here. Like, at the end of the day, I have to, that's actually true because I have a loan now. But at the end of the day, like, you have to decide what's good.
Do you actually own Rough Draft?
Yeah. And when I do like paperwork stuff, I have to be like a check to myself, signed by the president myself, seconded by the treasurer myself. It's hilarious. Yeah.
Hey, and do you ever walk to your office and knock on the door and then sit down and say, come in, and then turn back and go, hey, listen, you shorted me on this check?
Yeah, and I fire myself periodically.
As you should.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before we cover Inside Threat, which we're going to deal into, I want to know about, and I want to do this because I think it's so cool. You have a smash television series on your hands right now. So for those who maybe have been living in a cave and you don't know what The Night Agent is, I want to play, if I may, a trailer from that.
Hello? This runs deeper than you realize. And farther than you can imagine.
This particular show has everything. And I love the setup. Like when the guy's on the phone, here he is just toiling away. I'm down here in the basement. Oh, brother. And all of a sudden the phone rings. Well, that doesn't happen. And let the games begin. By the way, so big kudos to landing this gig. Huge thing. I want to know, how in the wide world of thrillers did you land this gig? Were you just walking along one day and said, oh, look, here's the book, and somebody just comes up and go, hey, this will make a really great series? I mean, tell me that process, because I'm so curious.
Yeah. I will back up a little bit to address something you said, which is like that phone call. That was the whole book, just the hook, because I had a friend who had a night watch job, and I imagined him sitting by a phone all night that never rings, and one day he rings, and it's like, oh, crazy. And then I talked about it with writer friends, and then I used it to get a new agent, and then they all said, go, and I said, great, and I sat down and I said, well, then what happens, So, I just had the hook, and then I had to find out, like, well, is the government really going to pay someone to sit by a phone? And then, and then you're just off to the races of writing a book. Sure. The experience, it was a little bit like you discussed of, I write the book and then it goes to a film agent. And what I've found is you want a film agent, the really good ones, they only talk when something really substantive is happening. So, if somebody's like, hey, I got Francis Ford Coppola's cousin to read it. You're like, oh, and then and then you have Hollywood Dreams, and if they're like, or you want to adapt, what is it? They'll say like, Winnie the Pooh is out of is in public domain. You want to write a Winnie the Pooh crime thriller? You're like, great, and then you're running around with Hollywood Dreams, and it's terrible. So it's good to have an agent who just calls you when something of substance happens, because the kind of name of the game is to not get distracted by shiny objects and to just sit down and write the books every day and stay hungry. What you are able to do as a writer is try to get the best kind of representation you can, and I was really fortunate to have Dan Conaway as my agent, and then Dan Conaway, through him and Writer's House, we landed with a fellow named Will Watkins, who was at ICM, which was really cool to be a part of there. And they were acquired by CAA, so now he's at CAA. And he just really liked the books, and I had never met him. And he got 200 no's on the night agent. So it was just a thing where he loved the books. And I had never had dinner with him. I had never met him. I had never charmed him. So the other aspect of this, like from kind of like a craft advice perspective thing, is to just write the good book. And what's really nice, and I talk about this in my author talks with people who want to get into publishing stuff, is it's actually, if you can believe it, got a huge meritocratic element to it, because I was just like a laid off junior employee, junior reporter from The Atlantic when I got my first book, and that got this crazy ride. So it's really cool. And what I like about the way everything in the industry works through agents is you just go write. You don't have to be meeting everybody and taking people out to dinner and sending whiskey to everybody at the end of the year. You just write, and agents know everybody, and they do that, and you can just kind of focus on your story. So that's basically what happened. This guy, Will, like my champion in Hollywood, basically, he just kept taking it out, and then he connected with Jamie Vanderbilt, who wrote some great White House movies, some great other movies, and he loved it. And then so a production company took it on, Project X. They were kind of brand new, but really well-established, really talented people. And I'd had a stuff option before, so I was like, okay, I'm not going to get my hopes up,
Right.
And then they said Sean Ryan from The Shield and other great shows wanted to take it on and maybe turn it into a show. And then I was like, okay, this seems to be like a big deal. But you never get across the finish line. And I've learned kind of the hard way, but it's a good lesson to never get your hopes up, never get too distracted. And then they said, well, Netflix picked it up from him. And I said, okay. And I was like really excited, but also just keeping everything in perspective. And then when they finally tell you something's going to get made, you're like, but because, you're like, it's like Lucy with the football. Nothing gets made. So, and there's always another hurdle. But so I didn't really believe it until I started seeing snippets of video coming out from the set, and then went to the set and saw, Gabe kicking someone's ass. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be a real thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when
really
you have
cool.
Gabe actually kicking said ass on a set, you got a pretty good idea the thing is rolling.
Yeah. And he's very good at that.
Yeah, he is quite good. Good looking guy. Dynamic. Here's the second part of that question is, how much involvement do you get on any kind of a daily basis? Now, I know there are some writers who go, they write it, they hand it off, and that's it. Nobody wants to see you again, or they're like, yeah, hey, just put the writer over there. Other people, like I got to see Jack Carr with that Amazon project, really kind of get in and put his hand on the terminal list. He even got a scene in the series, and, so how much involvement do you have? That's got to be cool.
Well, it's up to what you want to do as a writer. So,
sure.
And within reason, right? Because you can say, I want to write the screenplay, and they'll say, no. So this was kind of ideal, because I also recently had my first child. So I don't want to be like living in Vancouver for 4 months and going to a writer's room for 12 hours a day for 3 months. Although it's so cool, and I love TV movies, and I hope I get to do all that stuff someday, but it's just like not the time in my life. Now it's a time for balance. So it worked out perfectly, because once Sean Ryan came on, it was such a thrill and a relief, because I love Sean Ryan stuff. I watch his stuff and I marvel at how he can just take these characters and set them in opposition based on kind of their like character design, and just keep the tension going in a show for 6 or 7 years. And I kind of like study his stuff, and I think that must be so hard to do. And once I said, oh, well, great. I just want to make sure I don't get in the way of whatever you're doing here.
Right.
And then he was so nice. He sent me the script with this very gracious email. And it was uncanny to me, because he's such a great showrunner. The idea that he would be like concerned about what I think in any way. I'm like, I'm just excited you're here. And then I read it and I loved it. And then I talked to him, and we talked a little bit about the characters, and later I read press interviews he gave after the show came out, and those conversations turned out to be helpful and turned up in the show, which was really cool. But beside those top-level conversations, I didn't really have a lot to do day to day, but that was so nice, because I just trusted him so much, because he's so good, that I could say, I'm here to help with anything, because, I spent a lot of time with these characters, and I'm also happy to help by just staying out of the way and trusting you all to do what you do on this, which I was really excited to see. And then, my God, he delivered, because, the show, honestly, it's winning the lottery to get a show made. And then it's like winning the lottery again to have it not flop, basically. I was just hoping it would do okay, And then it turned into this like monster thing. It's the top 5 all time on Netflix. And so I said, okay, well, yeah, it has more viewers than Bridgerton. It's crazy.
Wow.
It's crazy. Wow. So I was like, okay, whatever Sean Ryan does that gets the entire world to just love it is amazing. And it was so cool for me, because there are scenes from the book, like, the opening of the book and the opening of the show, that are almost straight from the book. And it's such a thrill, because I grew up an 80s baby with TV and movies, to think like, stuff I write, you could just put it on screen. And also it's a thrill to see it all rendered and have these professionals doing it. And at the same time, by the time when I was reading and then when I was watching, I got to the end of the pilot, it was the first brand new thing from Sean. Because half of the show, maybe a little less, but big elements of the show are original to Sean, because he had something he was working on, and he kind of combined them. So it was a really fun experience for me, because I came to those twists the same way a reader would, or a new viewer, and I got the satisfaction of seeing it rendered on screen. And then at the end, I said, "What? Who are these people? What's with this baby? What the hell is going on here?" So I got to come at it fresh, as the audience would. It was just a really cool experience.
I think the single coolest thing that could possibly happen, like you just said, Matt, is to be sitting there a year, 2 years, maybe how many years ago, and you're writing this scene. You come up with the scene out of nowhere. You're hanging out in Point Loma, and you have this idea. Hey, what about if phone rings, and you write it down, you get going. And perhaps years later, you get to flip on the television, and there it is. That, to me, is just about as good as it gets.
It's so cool. I mean, and it's so cool. And the other thing, I mean, there's a few aspects, and it was especially cool because most authors, maybe because I have an exceptional experience here, they're adapting your show. Are they treating you like garbage? Are you happy? I think there's an expectation among other authors that it's not going to go well, or you're not going to be treated well. And I'm sure there's some substance to that somewhere in the world, but I was really fortunate with this. And everybody was really nice to me at the premiere. And, my joke is like, oh, it's that old Hollywood story where everyone over-delivers, things happen really quickly, and everyone's really nice,
Right, yeah.
So it was great because there's some trepidation, I guess, that goes into being adapted. And I just had a wonderful experience. And there's also an aspect, it's good to go see them do it because regardless of how the show comes out at the end, it is such a huge, painstaking undertaking. And I was totally in awe of how hard they work. Because there's a little like madness going on when you're finishing a book where you're just like working 12 hours and you're completely in this imaginary world. And then to see like 500 people all doing that in the middle of the night in the tunnels under a former insane asylum in Vancouver, which is where they shot the tunnels. It's amazing. And it's shocking how hard they work and how meticulous everything has to be in a TV show. One conversation that takes 5 minutes of screen time takes 2 hours to shoot. A fight scene, the comms tower fight scene, took like 14 hours. And then when they were done, they went and shot in the tunnels under the insane asylum. And I was completely in awe of how hard they all work.
Yeah. The number of hours in a day, it is pretty insane. Well, let's get into Inside Threat because this book right here is something else. It drops on 6/13, so there's going to be two things I'm celebrating that day. Your book and the birthday of my late mother. But it is a terrific read. And I know that this is going to be, talking about all this television series and so forth, this is going to be either a television series or a movie. I've just got a very good feeling about that. I'm putting that power into the universe. We'll see. We'll see.
Maybe some news will come out shortly.
Maybe some news shortly, soon. Yeah.
But nothing I can discuss yet.
No, I'm just, I'm giving that all up to the big guys and where they need to be. So I want to give you, if I may, and then we're gonna kind of break it down into a little elevator pitch. Here's what this way I can do my takeaway on the book without giving anything away. So folks, here you go. This is what the book has. Questionable good guys, enough romance to keep you bothered, enough surprises to keep you engaged, a classic bad couple who provide enough drama, while a classic thriller that provides plenty of action and even manages a surprising and unexpected twist. Ponder that, my Matthew friend.
That sounds pretty good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, so a lot of times I like to dig deep because I'm always making notes and I'm keeping, I highlight, I mark the hell out of the books and I go, there are certain things I really like. Now, here's a couple things. And then I want your elevator pitch. And I know you have it. There's a few things I really like about it. Love Eric Hill, who's your main guy. I dig Amber Cody too. I like her attitude. I like her grit. I like the way she is the best kind of female action Secret Service agent. She's got great backstory and depth, and she's not taking any crap. And their chemistry is dynamite. And I got to tell you something. Your president, James Klein, and First Lady Sarah, without sounding like I'm saying anything bad about our current president, I'm like, these are the kind of cats that I want in office.
Oh, good. Yeah, because presidents are tough, and it's hard to do presidents as real characters, so it's nice to, give them some depth and, to have the First Lady have some depth and moxie, too. So it was thank you, because this book, it started with kind of the movie premise of the setup of the book, which is, what if the president, this might be the elevator pitch, it might be getting...
Yeah, give me the elevator pitch. Here it is. Insert here.
What if the president gets locked into this huge emergency doomsday bunker, which is a real place, to get away from a threat, and finds himself locked inside with the threat. And then, they see the first body turn up, and then you're off to the races. So that it was a premise-driven book, and it was fun to see the characters kind of populate themselves and become more complex and stuff. And I have a great editor, Emily Crump, who really helped with the character development, and I'm really grateful for her edits on that, because it was nice to have somebody to go back and forth with and to round people out.
Yeah. And there's one thing I really love, and I want to mention this because here in the back of the book, I've got a highlighted. You're talking about, well, first of all, let's start with the front. So I love it when guys do this. Guys like you. First of all, I have a nice little cheat sheet so I know who everybody is, because it's chock full of agents. And at first, I started the book, Matt, by going, okay, yeah, I've got a lot of characters, and I kind of blew over that. And then I get going. I'm like, okay, hold on, let me go back a second. Let me remind myself who's who in the lineup. But then I dig this because I like details. So Raven Rock Mountain Complex is an actual complex. So you get to see, where the blast doors are, and the cavern, and the war room. And I love the description of the war room. So the President Klein's basically got his miniature Washington White House right there underground, and the different buildings in the reservoir. But then one step further, you tell me how the main tunnel is and the buildings and how everything works. But then back here, I love this. In Matt's acknowledgments, in real life, the blast doors swing rather than retract, which is interesting because you're like, well, what does that matter? But you do. And the springs under the buildings aren't actually tall enough to walk through. So I made them a little higher and could have a few good fight scenes in there. I love that kind of detail.
I guess it's a humble brag, because, Daniel Silva, everything in his book is real. And if it's not real, he'll tell you, he'll be like, the lamppost is on the left-hand side of the street in the acknowledgments. And I think that's fun for me as a reader, because when I read one of these, I'm in it for the story, but sure, if I know that I'm getting the real stuff and there's good research, and Raven Rock is a real place, these kind of secret emergency presidential powers where they can take over the country, those are real. So I love being able to read a good story where I feel like, I've been eating popcorn, but then at the end, I feel like I also got my vegetables a little bit. We might need to revise that metaphor a little bit, but you see where I'm going.
I got my popcorn and my broccoli all at the same time, so I'm feeling good.
That actually sounds terrible.
Yeah, when most people are putting M&Ms in their popcorn, you're putting broccoli.
Sprinkles with Brussels sprouts.
Well, it's good when guys like David Baldacci and Jack Carr are singing your praises. I mean, these guys who are busy writing their own books, and they only have so much time in the day, so they're tearing through your books and they're saying glorious things. So I love that. But I can't recall, Matt, who was it? And perhaps you can help me with this. Who said this? It's the best crime thriller of the season. Do you know who said that? I want to give credit where credit is due, baby. I can't
remember. I got a quote from Michael Connelly, I think, on The Night Agent, where I needed a fainting couch, because he said it was one of the best books to come along in years, and he's incredible. So I really was blown away by that.
I'm going to go one better for you, Matt. Our friend Michael says the story is impossible to put out of mind, revealing, relevant, and one of the best thrillers to come along in years. I mean, when you have Michael Connelly?
And the thing is, with him, I didn't it wasn't something where, I had mowed his lawn growing up and I had a chick to call in. I emailed him very graciously to say, I love your books, and he wrote back, he said, send me one. And then that came through, and then I passed out because I was so blown away.
You bring up a superb point, and I wonder if you'll give me just a second to talk about it. I was at Thriller Fest 2019 in New York City, and I was sitting at the feet of probably somebody like Harlan Coben, because I remember I had such a fun hoot talking to him. And right when you think as a novice writer, oh my God, I wish I could get a blurb from such and such, someone on stage, perhaps Harlan, said, hey guys, if you got a favorite author, just ask them. Sometimes you never know if they'll say yes or not, but just ask them. All I can do is say no, right?
Yeah, and I mean, what's funny about authors is it's so weird because, when you go to a law firm like, I don't know, Wilmer Hale or something, you're not seeing Wilmer and Hale.
No.
You're seeing some guy down here, but like all these authors, with very rare exceptions, are one man, one woman bands. And also, because I didn't know authors growing up, so I always thought it was weird and they would be like on a pedestal or a different thing. But except for the very tippy top people, most of us are just like excited to hear from you.
Yeah.
And even the tippy top people in thriller, mystery, suspense are total sweethearts. And there's this wonderful culture of paying it forward. So it's always incredible what a good community it is.
All right, two things. First of all, I do agree. I love that. And I have found the writing community to be incredibly loving and open-armed. Secondly, did you really use the phrase tippy-toppy?
Did I say tippy-toppy?
Yeah, you said tippy-toppy. Yeah, you said at the tippy-toppy of the...
Tippy-top. Tippy-top.
Tippy-top. Okay, tippy,
Yeah.
but still tippy-top, not tip-top, not very top, not the pinnacle. You went tip-top.
I spent a lot of time with my 15-month-old, so...
I was going to say...
Yeah. This is I'm code switching a little bit here, so it could be much worse.
Okay, because I was going to say, now she was born last February, if I recall, and you called her your new writing partner. So I'm like, okay, that's where tippy top came from, because you're tippy top. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry to belabor that. Had to have some fun with it.
She was in the carrier because she's a good napper, but she would only nap on me.
Right.
So when I was polishing Inside Threat, I do baby stuff all morning, and then because I ended up having to work during paternity leave a little bit, and then I would put her in the like Baby Bjorn thing, and then she would sleep, and I would spend 2 hours at the stand-up desk polishing, and then I was just like completely exhausted because I had this gorgeous little lump, in the carrier while I was writing for 2 hours. So it was really sweet.
I'm a big fan of naps, afternoon naps.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if I could just get in that little Bjorn and come over and visit you and just grab a little nap. Sounds so cozy.
I think you might outweigh me. It would probably.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
Can you see
it? I did not see it coming. I didn't think this podcast was going that way, but it's fun. It'd be like that tandem parachute thing. That's what it looks like when they're in the front facing carrier.
Yeah.
Like you do in the
I won't embarrass you. I'll stop there. All right. There are some people who say higher education isn't important. Others say it's mandatory. I'm probably one of those guys that has mixed feelings. I happen to have a slew of degrees, but I'm going to tell you something. Reading Inside Threat, you're going to see how Matthew's degree in history and literature from Harvard, no less, really has paid off. Because when you're reading this, this is not your average bear. And I'm not saying that in any kind of hooty-tooty-faluty kind of way. I'm just saying, as you read it, this guy is educated, and it shows. So that's a compliment in all the best ways.
Thank you.
It also begs a two-part question I'm famous for. Number one, did you have any idea that you'd be able to craft a career as successful as you've been able to do, which could be a yes or no? And how far back does your writing passion go?
So, no, I was completely terrified.
Oh, wow.
And they're related. So, I got into Harvard because I had done a bunch of like physics and chemistry research and was good at math. And I was a chemistry and physics major. And that was a proven thing that I was really good at. And when you go from like a public school in New Jersey to Harvard with one thing, you're like, I should stick with this thing. But I loved writing, and it was around, I think, the summer after my freshman year, all of my jobs fell through. and I was just doing like, I don't know, doing whatever for money, and like real whatever New Jersey stuff. And I was back in my parents' house, and I started writing, and I would write like in the middle of the night. And then my dad would come down for breakfast, and I'd be finishing writing. I would write on the deck in a little lawn chair with my laptop, because I still like writing at night. My schedule, I can't really do it. It's all possibility, and nobody's watching. Yeah. And that's when I first got the bug. But I would be like clocking out of the night shifts, and my dad would come down and be like, "What the hell is this kid doing? He's on the deck with a lawn chair writing." And that's when I caught the writing bug. And I also caught kind of the literature bug. But I had always loved English and literature. And the fun story is that my mom went back to school to finish her undergrad degree when I was in late elementary, early middle school. And then she went straight through to get her master's. So my house growing up, my dad would read like 5 thrillers a week. And then my mom would have like William Butler Yeats and Hilda Doolittle and Emily Dickinson. And she was getting her master's. So there was like a standard thing in my house with my mom would go in with a stack of books and lock the door, and you'd hear the IBM going because she was writing a literary study. And it was like the coolest thing on earth. And she'd come out, and there was Joseph Conrad and all these translations of the Iliad. So it was just a great stew of, every kind of good story. And I grew up on that stuff, and also Michael Crichton. I have a letter I wrote to Michael Crichton when I was 9 because I just like loved Jurassic Park. And so I had this nice stew, and I always had this literary stuff. And I remember in college when I wanted to switch to English, because one professor took a paper I had written in sort of a gen ed kind of course and said, "This is great." And he read it out to the class, and I was like, oh my God. But I was terrified that I would never make a living. And I switched, and then I ended up getting a job in journalism. And through that, sort of figured out that the old thriller things that I had read growing up, including like Joseph Conrad, like the nice literary bone stuff, were what I wanted to write. And then in working at the Atlantic in DC, I got sort of the material that fired my imagination, because in college they have you write very introspective literary stuff, and I stink at that. So my first goes at fiction were not great, because I was a 19-year-old kid. I thought I had come from because I went to public school, I thought I was had come from the mean streets, because Harvard was such a big distinction. But it wasn't really that big a jump. Right. And I had nothing really to say in like a literary introspection New Yorker short story way. So it didn't suit me. And I was just fortunate that I had the writing habit, and then I was at the Atlantic, so I got into the espionage, politics, foreign affairs stuff. And then it took me forever to figure out that actually thrillers were the book I would write. So that's kind of how it all came together. And then I got laid off from the Atlantic, and then heard back on the first thing I'd ever sent out professionally 3 days after I got my notice. And a very big deal agent said, "You should keep going." So I kept going. And it was just 2 years of living off of like meager savings, about to get married, telling my father-in-law like, "Oh, don't worry, this novel will work out." And then the wedding was kind of my deadline for this writing project. And, and then a month before the wedding, we sold the 500 to Little Brown and the film rights to Fox. So it's like a white knuckle ride. And I'm not one of these people who's like, well, a life in the arts, and I'm sure everything will work out. Like I'm a practical guy. Right. So, ending up with a career in the arts is not my temperament, and the sort of roller coaster of it is still a little harrowing.
That is an amazing story, because you wouldn't expect that, from a science guy, chemistry to the creative world. And I think that probably prepared you beautifully to go, well, I'm going to give this a shot, but I always have kind of this to fall back on, so to speak. I'm not saying classically you had a plan B, but you got the smarts to know, well, I got a Harvard degree. There are other things I can do if this just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right?
Although at a certain point you get old enough that like, it's too late. I guess it's never too late,
It's never too late.
but yeah.
No. No, no, no. All right. As we begin to close, there's one thing I always do, and I know you're an avid fan of this show and you watch it religiously, so you would know this. I end each show asking my guest their best piece of writing advice because I have so many listeners and viewers, both YouTube and podcast, that probably 97.543 percentage, if you wanted to be analytical about it, that begs to hear that best advice. So what is Matt Quirk's best piece of writing advice? Plenty of lead up for
My
that.
piece of writing advice is to get away from the computer, because it's so intimidating to sit down and try to write your story. So I will, when I'm figuring out the whole plot of a book, because I'm an outliner, I'll just kind of wander around, look like a crazy person, or walk at the cliffs here, and let it all fill in. And then once I figure it out, then I go write it down. And then at the micro scale, when I'm writing a scene, I just kind of wander around until I picture what's going to happen in that scene. And I make some voice notes. And then I sit down at the computer, and then I write it down. Because I just get caught up moving words around. And then more generally, this is two pieces of writing advice, is to do the shitty first draft, they call it.
Right.
Because there's so much kind of stage fright and perfectionism, and the whole thing of writing is a head game. So to just give yourself absolute permission to write it out as rough as you want, and then know you can fix it later. And so if you combine knowing, like having really spent time making sure the whole thing will work with taking the pressure off yourself by letting yourself write a rough draft of it, then you have a super rough but probably like structurally sound draft, and then it's just revision and you can relax a little bit because you have the pages.
I love that, Matt. And I'll tell you why I like it. You do something that I do similarly, and I don't like it because it's similar to what I do. Excuse me. But it's that, and I think you started out perfectly with it. Sometimes when you start with that blank page, it's intimidating. You're like, oh, where am I going to start? And that little cursor is just blinking at you if you're on a computer.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm with you. If I have a random idea, my favorite thing in the world is to walk, preferably along the beach, and just walk. The exercise of walking just frees you up, or driving. That's my second favorite thing to do, is you just drive, because this is taking care of one side of your brain. And you can just kind of toil on the other side. And then, and here's the funny thing. People will say, oh, I got to write it down right away. How many times, this is somewhat rhetorical, sometimes partly inquisitive, because if I have a great idea, or you have a great idea, I bet you don't forget that idea. You're like, oh, that's interesting. It sticks in your brain. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah. Stephen King has some good stuff on this.
Yeah. But don't you agree? Because like if I'll have an idea, okay. And it just locks. Now, I can't tell you what I had for lunch yesterday, but I can tell you what that idea was 12 years ago. So that walking and that introspection just allows you to kind of work out the kinks. So then when you sit down, you feel the confidence is kind of built up for you, whether you're going to write it longhand or type it. So I love that, Matt.
And what I had, which was a real problem for me, coming from math and physics and chemistry, was the idea that there was a right answer.
Right.
And that you could do things schematically, formulaically. So in my first English papers, in my first books, I thought there was a process and a solution. And I now know that the process is like wander along and let the folds in your brain do their bizarre, sedimentary, whatever they do to ideas. And then at the end, you'll have the right answer. I was not ready for that. And so I spent a lot of years kind of struggling, thinking I could just move words around on a page. So I hear you that like the weird misto things that your brain does when you're just walking or just letting an idea gestate, that's how it works. And that's all there is to it. You just need time and you need focus, which is really hard for people to find. And when you're walking, you're not like trying to perfect it on a computer, and you're not, hopefully not dicking around on your phone.
Yeah, hopefully not dicking around on your phone.
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
Just say no to dicking on the phone. What I especially like about that is that you said this, you're giving yourself permission. I don't want to belabor the point, but you're giving yourself permission to just, oh, that didn't work. Oh, that didn't work. Oh, I can see why that doesn't work. And I think that's a lot of it. Just give yourself permission to F it up a little bit.
Yeah, and also, like, if you're spending a lot of time just thinking about things, you don't have 2,000 words as you were trying out whether this guy should have, been attacked by a bear when he was young or whatever.
Right.
And so it's easier everything's faster because you're not attached to these things you've already written and invested in.
Right. And sometimes you'll write. Go ahead.
Well, and the rough draft is the same way, because you'll go back and you'll reread the whole thing and you'll be like, this character doesn't work. And and this is just for me. If I had written that character and been like weeping at the beauty of all these lines I wrote with that character, and then all the polishing and my turn of phrase and then I have to go back later and just cut that character, I'm not psychologically or emotionally capable of that. But if it's like, hey, I threw that up in an afternoon and it was fine, and reading it now I realize like the hero doesn't need two people they're trying to save, then I can get rid of it. So that's, it has advantages coming and going, I should say.
Yeah. Hold for passing plane.
Yeah, that's the point.
Yeah. I'm just picturing you, man. I'm just picturing you weeping over the keyboard. This is so
I get emotional. I get emotional. And sometimes it's for great stuff. And the worst thing is when you write something like that and then you give it to your agent or editor and they're like, oh, that was flat. That was really flat. And you're like, I was in tears. And it's just because and this is why it's so subjective and sometimes things don't work. You're so close to it. You're literally sharing subjectivity with these characters. You're in their mind that you've completely lost perspective.
Well, this has been a great time, Matt. I'm looking at the clock. I'm running a little bit late. I got a little pressure situation, so let's go ahead and ring off here. But I want to say, folks, if you want to learn more, visit MatthewQuirk.com. You'll see it here on the screen. Follow him on Twitter as I do at mquirk, and he's on both Instagram and Facebook at the same place called Matthew Quirk Author. Matt, thanks so much for showing up.
Thank you. Yeah, this was a blast.
So much fun. And next time, promise me, we'll sit down face to face down there in the Point or somewhere in between. Yes?
Yeah. Can't wait.
We can even do it there in the garage or bedroom. We can stack a few things up on Converse sneaker boxes, whatever it takes.
Yeah, we'll have to shove some stuff to the side to make a little bit more room.
Thanks again to Matt Quirk. The book, Inside Threat. What a good time. What a cool dude. Way funnier than I was imagining. I don't know why. I mean, come on. Like, Inside Threat, a read and a half. Night Agent, a television show on Netflix that you're going to want to watch. It's just flat out good. And did you hear on the show just a little tiny bit of a hint? Wondering if this is going to become a little Inside Threat TV show series? Mm-hmm. All right, folks, as we get ready to wrap up the month of May, and once again, I say big thanks to the superstar, the rock stars that have made May so epic. Don Winslow, Jack Carr, TJ Newman, Chris Haughty, Frank Bill, Elisa Valdez, Matthew Quirk. I'm going to do my best to top it, though. It's going to be hard. I'm going to give it my very best shot. Can't tell you who it is, though. I'm going to keep it a surprise. Until next time, I'm David Temple, your host. I'll see you next time for another edition of The Thriller Zone.
Your front row seat to the best thrillers. The Thriller Zone.
Where's Mama and Popo?